Welcome to the Must Reads interview series sponsored by the Perkins Center for Preaching Excellence. I'm Wes Allen, and I'm excited to have with me Dr. Richard W. Voelz, Associate Professor of Preaching and Worship at Union Presbyterian Seminary in Richmond, Virginia. He's also currently the president of the Academy of Homiletics, which is going to be something that ends for him soon, so I'm glad we're getting the interview there. And he directs make sure I get the name right, the Bridge for Early Career Preachers.
You got it. Yep.
Okay, great program. So if you're a young, new preacher, look that up. He's joining us today, however, to talk about his recent book that's entitled From Pulpit to Public Square. And the subtitle is Faithful Speech Beyond Church Walls. It's published by Westminster John Knox. So, Rich, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, the title of the book sounds like, but doesn't, call preachers to abandon the pulpit for public speech. Instead, it's interested in the similarities and differences between speaking from the pulpit and speaking in other locales for other reasons. At least that's the way I read it. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in my intro to preaching classes, I've got students who do not see their call as limited to what goes on in the congregation and want to use their voices more and more so outside in the public square. And I have students who never intend to go into congregational ministry, and I want them to have tools in their toolkit that help them make that move from congregational ministry and preaching out into the public square so they can offer faithful witness there. Yeah, so absolutely. Definitely not abandoning the pulpit. I'll say that again, just so we have it on record and clear. We are not abandoning the pulpit, but there are modes of public witness and public speech that are different from what we do in congregational preaching.
And yet, in the book, you sort of follow the steps of preparing a sermon and the different aspects, but then adapt and apply to this new setting. So I'm just wondering if you could give us one example of what you see as a difference between preaching to the faithful, the congregation, and proclaiming, speaking outside, and then what kind of corollaries you draw and adapt to help a preacher.
Yeah, so one of the main differences is that most preachers are going to, when they spend their time preparing for a sermon for a congregational ministry, they're going to spend their week huddled around a biblical text or set of biblical texts for the week. And they're going to study that text. They're going to put it into conversation with lots of different sources and resources. And that's where they're going to focus a great deal of their time is on the explication of the text for the congregation for lots of different reasons. But when we make our way out into the public square, the Bible doesn't function for most contexts as the resource, as the source of wisdom or authoritative source for us in the same way. And so that piece gets dropped, right? Because that doesn't mean we don't interact with Scripture. It just means we interact with it, if we do, in a significantly different way. And it's not the focus of what we are gathering around in terms of the sermon. So that's number one. A second small one and a corollary to that is I talk about in the book what I call faith-rooted speech, which is like to imagine this continuum of how faithy language pops up in public speech. So we don't talk to people in the same way that we do inside the congregation because the context is different, right? The listeners are different. And we want to analyze the context and think about who is going to be listening. And we want to think about the ways that our faith-rooted language functions for them. Oftentimes a more religiously pluralistic context, maybe a multi-faith or interfaith context, one in which perhaps there are people who are antagonistic to faith. And so I talk about the continuum of faith-rooted speech, and I use a agricultural metaphor to kind of unpack this, where sometimes our faith language is kind of rumbling under the surface, like a carrot or a potato. Sometimes it's kind of still somewhat subtle, like a strawberry. You know, strawberries grow close to the ground. And other times our faith language is kind of like really waving at folks and saying, "Hey, look over here. These are the claims that I'm bringing to the table." Kind of like a cherry tree is the analogy I use there. So those two, I think, are some significant differences. They're not the only ones, but I think kind of get at some of the main differences.
Certainly a parallel between use of scripture and faith language. There, what we're used to foregrounding has to become background, and we draw on those sources, but we don't quote them in the same
Right.
way. Yeah. So you mentioned that one of the reasons you're interested in this is what you see in your students, where their interest is, where their vocational career goals are, and all. I'm just wondering, in terms of wider culture and all, also the question of why this book now? What
Yeah.
what is it that draws you to the need for preachers to step out of the pulpit at times and speak publicly?
Yeah. This book really emerged from the classroom where I was trying to read my students and where they're going in their ministries in days gone by, and not that long ago. I think many students would have seen themselves preparing for ministry, preparing for congregational ministries, and in many ways, I mean, not completely limited, but sort of confined largely to the walls of the church, right,
Yeah.
and to congregational worship. Over the past several years, that is not how our students are seeing their call. And it's not how those who are out in congregations are seeing their call. They see that their call is deeply integrated with what's going on in their local communities and what's going on in wider U.S. and beyond culture and what's going on in global culture, and feeling the need for faith representation and faith voice in the public square. And so wanted to give tools and dispositions that can help folks make that back and forth move in a way that I wasn't taught, in a way that I don't think is predominantly being taught in seminaries across the US, so that folks can really have what they need to stand out in front of City Hall or go make a brief speech to City Council or to the school board. Because we know that these are really contentious times and times where, in my estimation, faith leaders need to step up to the plate and be front and center in their communities, working with others across lines of difference and across allied, borders and boundaries to work for the public good in ways that really reflect the place of faith, not just within the congregational sphere, within congregational life, but out in the public.
Yeah, I think it's important to name that the book isn't about apologetics or evangelism, although, if people are invited in by the language, great, but it's really about representing the faith and the tradition in a way that people outside of that tradition or multiple traditions can hear. And I really appreciate that. So thank you so much for the book. Thank you for taking time to talk with us today. Viewers, I hope you'll go out and get the book. It's a great read. We'll have you back again when you're done being president and you're ready to write some more and have more time. So thank you very much, Rich.
Thanks, Les. Really appreciate it.